Hello and welcome, everyone. As always, we're going to give it a few moments as people continue to join the webinar that we have today on risk sharing and partnerships. It's the third of the 4 webinar series that the Global Working Group on Locally Led CVA is facilitating as its annual efforts and initiatives to continue to uplift the voices of local actors, bring forward much needed ideas and conversations to continue pushing forward on locally led CVA and the localization of cash responses globally. In the meantime, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from, what you do, and we will be starting in a few moments. All right. Lots of people still joining. Again, welcome to everyone. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're very excited to start the conversation in a bit. I have amazing speakers with us today that we're very lucky to have join us as we unpack a very important conversation at a very pivotal time within the sector, being the humanitarian reset. All right. I don't want to take any time from the conversations that we're going to have, so let's kick it off. My name is Chris Shama. I work with the CALP Network, and today I will be facilitating the session on behalf of the Global Working Group on Locally Led CVA. Let's start with a few housekeeping rules. So this is a 60-minute webinar. If you're not speaking, could you please make sure to mute your mics? This session is being recorded. And you do have the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen for you to drop any questions in the chat, or feel free to drop in the designated Q&A box, but feel free to also drop it in the chat, and we will try to get back to you as soon as possible. And as always, if there are any Zoom hackers, they will be removed and blocked to maintain a very comfortable and easy flowing session. Next slide, please. So what are we doing different with this webinar series? We have a Padlet. A Padlet is a very flexible tool. We're going to be dropping the link in the chat. It's a way that you can engage and join the conversation either prior to these webinars, during the webinars, or after the webinars. We have a few questions curated per webinar for people to comment under each question, as you can see with the red highlighted circle. Add your comment under the question that you see there, and keep adding your thoughts, your reflections and experiences. We want to hear from you, from your experiences, from your insights, and from the challenges that you're facing. Next slide, please. So how is this going to run today? So I'm going to start with a quick overview of how the first and the second webinars went, like big statements that we got from there. A quick review, kind of reflections on what does the current literature say on risk sharing and partnerships. And then right after that, we're going to be introducing our speakers for today, who will be coming in with their opening statements before we kick off a very exciting conversation with all of them. And then, as always, for those who have joined before, you know this, and for those joining today, we have closing reflections, and then a quick reminder for the closing and final webinar coming up on November 19th. With that, let's kick off. So, what does the current literature say about risk sharing and partnerships? Nothing shocking, but it continues to emphasize where we need to put in time and effort and resources to really bring forward change that is much needed. So risk sharing is essential for locally led CVA, for locally led responses in general, but especially locally led CVA, considering the multiple partners and stakeholders that are incorporated throughout the CVA programming. And without negotiated risk sharing, we're seeing a lot of the risk being transferred down the chain, and ultimately kind of being managed at the low key, the last mile situation. Compliance models must evolve and not simply adapt. We need to shift to something that is less fear-driven and more partnership-driven, where the risk culture in general must change at the organizational and the sector level. And kind of shifting from risk avoidance to risk responsibility, genuine risk sharing, and ultimately adapting to the realities of context-driven changes. And basically underpinning all of these things, if the reset dialogues don't include risk and compliance as central conversations and not simply as side topics, then we're going to continue to see these aspects serve as brakes rather on transformation and trust building. So what did we get from the first and the second webinar around all of these conversations that initially started about the wider humanitarian reset and then about coordination with impact? So locally led CVA is already happening. It's often outside the formal system, and it's driven by communities and grassroots. We do know that the humanitarian system is not keeping up pace with the amount of local innovation, adaptability, and leadership that we're seeing in different contexts. This is not news. Policy commitments are not being translated into practice within organizations, across sectors, and across the board. And this is why we keep being stuck in the definitions, and the power continues to remain centralized. We also heard from the first and the second webinars about the over-standardization and homogenization of cash responses, taking away from its transformative power. And coordination only works when it's inclusive, beyond tokenistic participation in different spaces. Next slide. Additional things that we heard from the first and second webinar, and these points kind of lean into the conversations that we will be having today around risk compliance and funding models that are reinforcing control rather than enabling trust. We're still yet to see genuine, true co-ownership of responses and design of responses. Mutual aid and grassroots systems are delivering at scale, but lack recognition, protection, and direct resources. And again, so compliance and accountability structures must evolve and not restrict locally led CVA. Some of the broader calls to action that we've heard from the different speakers and from the audience as well: the need to fund and resource local coordination and capacity directly, to hand over the levers of design and decision-making, to create flexibility and trust-based funding and coordination models, and last but not least, shift from competitive dynamics to collective people-centered action. And with that, I would like to introduce who the speakers that are joining us today. We're very lucky to have them. We have Naomi Ayot Oyora, the Executive Director at CAP AIDS Uganda, Sagal Hussein, the East Africa Community of Practice Coordinator and is an independent consultant. And last but not least, Ahmed Ibrahim, convener of the ASAL Humanitarian Network in Kenya. We're going to now take down the slides, and without further ado, Naomi, over to you to say hello to everyone and to start with your opening statement around the conversation today of risk sharing and partnerships. Over to you, Naomi.
Thank you, Chris, first for the preamble and two for the platform for local experts to come and share. Looking at the theme, what's left and what's next. I just want to emphasize that we are not here. We are not going to win by being clever in presenting these issues, but in accepting our defaults in the sector. So we are talking about partnerships and risk sharing. And we all know that when we are dealing with, especially the last mile actors, such vocabularies may not even be closer to them, or they may not even be familiar with them. I'm just sharing an experience as the national convener of the Local Leadership Labs. We've been interacting with over 200 local and national actors. Like, it was just like, Naomi, just be a local actor. You've not been to any global space. You have not interacted with great brains like Ahmed. Just be a local actor in the community and create a platform to just listen to the local and national actors who are doing tremendous work that we easily ignore simply because we've labeled them as not having compliance issue systems, or simply because they don't have, we've then labeled them as highly risky, but they're transforming lives in the communities. And I'll quote one in one of these discussions who said, or CAP AIDS, thank you for giving us this opportunity. Finally, you valued us and you feel like at least we have one big girl or one big boy who can come down in the community and appreciate the work that we are doing. But we want to emphasize that with or without systems, we are going to continue serving our community people, because even if we don't have resources, they still walk to our offices demanding for services, and we are accountable to them when we are unable to provide, or even when we provide. So this was very touching statement in the process. And I mean, it just called for self-reflection. How often do we give such opportunities to just listen, humble ourselves and just listen, and depower whatever we know, whatever masters and degrees we have, and just listen to these local actors, these self-help groups that are transforming lives, who don't know anything about compliance, but have their contextual way of checking on themselves, or checking that actually, if I give you 5 kilograms of beans, you're going to take it to that household that the rainfall just swept away each and everything of theirs. So what am I trying to say? When we talk about partnerships and risk sharing, partnerships should be in the interest of both parties that are entering into this partnership. And it should be carefully and respectfully considered and agreed. Otherwise, there's no partnership. If it is respectfully and carefully done and agreed upon, then we have partnership, and then we will definitely have equity. If compliance is understood by each one of us in this relationship, what it is and what it is not, knowledge is power, then we are both able to equitably perform towards achieving the compliance. So when I go back to the theme, what's left and what's next? We have not cascaded the knowledge, but we still label the local and national actors and not having the systems. We have not invested in them, but we still label them as having no capacity and highly risky. But when the crisis strike, they'll look for that local actor who knows the community, who knows the danger spots, who knows the hot spots, to reach out to those spots, because the high guys, it will be so risky, or the safeguarding mechanisms don't allow them to go to those hot spots. So when does a real partnership actually exist? And when does real compliance do exist and not intentionally act as a compliance conundrum, barring local and national actors from serving transformative work in the community? So what's next? How do we unlock the voucher and cash assistance so that it supports the local supply chain and actually supports the most vulnerable? How do we unlock it such that it doesn't mean that the prices should escalate somewhere, and there should be conditions where procurements should be done from a particular supplier who has attained certain compliance standards? When do we look at compliance as actually increasing efficiency and effectiveness, but not shutting down community and charitable works? And above all, what's next is the role. The systems may not work, but what will Naomi, what will Ahmed, what will Segal, what will Chris do, each one of us, towards ensuring that the affected population is at the center of the partnerships that we make, is at the center of the compliance strategies or policies or processes that we make? and not hinder effectiveness and efficiency in humanitarian response. Thank you for inviting me to be a panelist today.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you so much. Powerful, powerful points. And I love the last point that you made around it's everyone's responsibility at all levels, everywhere. And with that, I am very happy to bring in Sagal. Sagal, over to you, my dear.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Naomi, for starting us off so beautifully. I've been fortunate to support local actors through the SCLR approach, which stands for Supporting Community-Led Response. It's a crisis response framework that works to strengthen existing community-driven mutual aid and spontaneous local action. So basically, the people on the ground and all who are already leading and doing this work, us supporting them, either scaling their work, learning, creating dialogue, and so on. And a common myth of SCLR is that it's cash only. It's actually bigger than that. It's a bigger commitment. And I would actually argue that not all cash is good. So some could actually be quite harmful. So my reflections today, it's a bit around that lens. Yeah, and I'm really focused on when communities and local organizations could lead in real time and how partnerships and risk actually play in practice. For me, SCLR represents a shift on how decisions are made, who makes them, and how we strengthen the work communities are already leading, rather than imposing something new for them. But for that to happen, our partnerships have to be real. And real partnership takes time before the agreement is signed, during implementation, and long after the project closes or the initiatives close. Too often, I think as humanitarians, we focus on their pre-work and post-work phases, which is often rushed. And that's where risk becomes sometimes what we have to manage on paper rather than understanding the context. The sector treats risk as a sort of control, in my opinion, compliance, finance, only related to distribution, but it's a bit more than that. Yeah, and so I think a big question for me is sometimes the biggest risk we take is as international or outside external actors is not trusting local systems enough to carry out what communities have already been carrying. And so taking a chance on communities, and by communities, I mean the local actors who are doing this work, who are involved, who are affected by everyday crisis or everyday situations. I think a good change or a glimmer of change I've seen is with a collaborative fund called Resilio that's just launched recently or in the process of launching. And it's basically taking and exploring flexible funds, a pooled funding for locally led responses. So that's a bit, changing the conversation, and, those who are involved with this philanthropic pooled funding, they're actually, assessing and taking a step back and actually reflecting on their risks and policies and positions on how they feel. So it's quite important. And it's actually, I think, a good direction. So I want to leave you with a few reflections or challenges. I say too often I see, it's important that local actors are shifting or leading the shift. So too often I see organizations waiting for instructions on what to do or how risk should be managed. I'd love to see local actors shaping decision-making, defining who owns risk and deciding how resources flow, because they are the ones closest to the communities. As far as the conversation of consortiums go, from my experience, consortiums often happen very quickly, sometimes just to meet funding deadlines or have been stretched over multiple years. It's very top down, in my opinion, even though there's some local opinion being utilized. But what I haven't seen done is, and would be an interesting model, is some of the funding in a consortium be set aside for local and national NGOs to lead their own due diligence. INGOs do it on their side all the time, so why not extend the same trust to local actors? What does this relationship look like? I think that would be cheeky and very interesting to see. The funding model, I think it would be interesting also to see, can we imagine funding that's not just projectized, top down and short term? You as a local actor or a program manager on the ground should be comfortable enough to go back to a funder and say, this is not enough, or for us to do what you're asking us to do, what we'd like to do, what we've agreed on, but actually going back and say, honestly, I might need a bigger deadline, 6 months to make a change, make an impact may not be enough. And I think this is something that with SCLR and partnerships and something that we definitely encourage. And last but not least, I'd say when it comes to resourcing risks or having those conversations, I think we often talk about risk like something to control, but local actors are already managing complex risks every day, social, political, and personal. So our role isn't necessarily to take over or tell them, but to ask the right questions. What works? In SCLR, we have a bid committee process where we actually ask, the questions that the communities may have missed because, we're coming through the lens that they already carry their own power. They already carry their own knowledge and strengths coming in. And through that process, I think we would be really encouraged to rethink and design the donor frameworks and risk sharing frameworks that do exist. I think we should be challenging. I don't think these risk sharing frameworks personally should be written in, international countries like, Hague or, wherever it is. Like, I think risk sharing frameworks should be done locally. And so I'll stop there. I think we have a lot to say, but I'd also want to give time to my colleague Ahmed.
Thank you so much, Sagal. So many points that I can't wait to get back to you about. But I love the emphasis about trusting what already exists on the ground and what's actually happening and where risk needs to be owned and managed. So last but not least, Ahmed, over to you with your opening statements. And welcome.
Thank you
welcome
very
to
much.
the space.
And, thank you very much for inviting us to this critical space. And hopefully what we will say will be able to trigger the thoughts of everybody in the sector and be able to really maximize on what is really working already. So I'll be giving my experience from the ASAD Humanitarian Network perspective. Is a network of local actors who are working in the arid and semi-arid areas of Kenya for quite a while. And our journey has been largely shaped by localization leadership demonstrated over time, and really working through the processes. And as I've already said, because we are quite a number of local networks, we believe because we use what we call a capacity sharing, rapid response mechanisms, networked response models, we believe none of our members has a capacity problem because we can deploy in time for them to really be able to use the normal processes to really upscale their staffing. So from that perspective, I feel that in most cases, there's quite a lot of time lag wasted in really shaping what kind of partnerships need to happen during crisis. And largely it's because proper hotspot mapping and being ready in advance is really not being put into effect, and really waiting for us to really do our job right. It will be good for us to really do it well. So from the perspective that I'll be giving today, there will be a number of ways we have walked the talk of the localization over time. We never waited. And together with the like-minded organizations, we have been really pushing the bar from a process where INGOs have been operational since we came into functioning networks 2019 to today in 2025, where the partners we work with 100% working with the local actors as the last mile responders, where the INGOs and the other UN teams provide technical support, funding, and processes support here and there. So as we go into this and dive in, we are currently doing perception, risk perception survey with the members and a number of, together with the Charter for Change in Kenya, as a way to be able to really do a high level risk sharing session in Kenya with all the different actors, including government. That will now be able to really say what is the risk sharing and of the SHU-ERA and amongst the different actors themselves within their spaces. And as we meet in that, then we'll use that as a way to really look at it in a more in-depth way. And we are really looking at from response to localization leadership for transformation of the system. So I'll be happy to share a few more reflections as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. And again, just building on everything that we've heard so far, a lot of risk management and risk sharing continues to happen at the local level, but unfortunately it's not properly captured or factored into the wider conversations on a sector level, on a regional level, on a global level. And so with that, maybe the first point I'd like to start with. Sagal, you mentioned about the importance of taking time through three phases: before, during, and after. With the before and the after being quite rushed. Can you share a bit more about your thoughts about what needs to happen before that is crucial and will contribute to better risk management and stronger partnerships, in your opinion?
Great. Thank you, Chris. With taking time, I mean, we're building trust with partners. So it's not just transactional. It's not just happening at the agreement. I think it's really important to learn what values we share, what's the mutual understanding. What are you trying to accomplish here? Like, everyone could do a burn rate. Anyone could manage a program, to be honest. But what is the end goal? Is the end goal to make sure that communities are independent from you? Or like, what is the main goal? And do you agree with one another on that? I think taking time, it involves relationship building, listening, agreeing, being aware of the power dynamics that exist at the INGO level, local, national level, as well as the community level. And by that, I mean the local actors. With SCLR, something that we're encouraged to do, and I do myself, is that before even, they come through a co-design, which is that initial workshop to kind of onboard a national partner, we meet with their management. Is this something that they actually want to do? And, do they fit it? Sometimes it's not a right fit. Sometimes by theory, they're interested in SCLR, but there's no way, maybe we find out in these meetings that they're actually going to be struggling with the unlearning process. So that's really where it's kind of the make or break point for SCLR, where we start off and we don't rush that process at all. If I don't feel quite comfortable on jumping in and supporting this partner, I come back and say, can we have additional conversations? And usually they're quite open, where sometimes they're not, and that's a true indicator of their interest of why they're doing it. Also at the community level, injecting cash. You just don't inject the cash because you see people, doing good work. You want to know how they're funding themselves. Sometimes injecting cash could be quite harmful, like I said. And so, you don't want to halt the good work they're already doing. So encouragement and facilitating and learning actually, helps in that process as well. With SCLR, you're also not obligated to immediately work with a community group your first time through. I think conventional aid is quite different. You're going through your checklist and you're obligated to kind of work with someone or work with a group or work with a village that has been predetermined for you. So taking time, it happens in all different aspects. I think at the end for SCLR is that reflection piece. not just at the community level, where the national actors and the community groups are speaking and having these conversations and challenging one another on both ends, but also I'd love to hear back from the donor. Like, you know, I'd love to hear back from them. When I submit a report, I want to hear what you thought about the report, not just a pass, fail, good or bad. Like, I want to see what points actually was of interest to you and what you want to learn more about. So yeah, taking time. Time is everything.
Thanks, Sagal. I love the point that you raised about the conversations, which are often taken for granted, to see if the partnerships are going to work, if the values are aligned, if the ways of working actually is a work environment that both parties want to get into, and if the systems are able to adapt to local realities and capacities as needed. And I want to build on that and maybe go back to Naomi. Naomi, you mentioned really important points around organizational support, allocation of resources and institutional capacity. What are your thoughts on that when it comes to genuine partnerships and risk sharing?
Thanks, Chris. So when I look at risk from this local actor perspective, not yet so big. I know I coordinate 14 local and national actors and at various stages of development. And like I said, a lot of them don't even have capacity to hire an internal risk manager or compliance manager. So simply because the kind of funding or partnerships, I don't know if I should even call them partnerships, the kind of relationship they have, probably if I can borrow Segal's word, are contractual relationships where they are being hired to simply burn money. And there is no operational cost attached to that. And then there is no operational cost to support any risks that may come. There's even no time for you to do an assessment of what is your risk like. And because local and national actors have been denied resources for a very long time, we're in that desperate position. And yet in real time, so you'll accept anything as long as there's some money coming into your organization to do some work. But then in reality, if we had been approaching risk, if that's where we are to go, approach risk management from an honest perspective and approach partnerships from an honest perspective where there's respect, mutual respect, and it is being carefully done while considering the interest of both parties. It's a proactive approach and it is ongoing, where you give the opportunity to the local actor to identify the potential risks in a particular community they serve, assess the degree to which it can have an impact on their interventions or in their response, and also come up with treating or mitigation, what I would locally say, treating mechanisms for the risks that they foresee could easily affect the efficiency in the humanitarian response in a particular community, but also not affect only the actor and extend the risk to the potential rights holder who is supposed to be receiving the services. So it's actually a process. And I agree with Segal that it requires time. But what is the reality on ground? If we reflect back on the theme for this webinar, what's left and what's next? So very few actors on ground, particularly national and local actors, are given that time. You may sign, we have experiences where we have local actors who have signed contracts, and then the money comes after 3 months, or comes when you have 2 months to closure of the project, the reality on ground. And it moves away from a transformative intervention to a burn rate intervention, a burn rate response. So there's no time for identifying, for assessing the risk, and for treating. There's just no time to even think about the potential risks that might affect this intervention. Right there and then, the neuro trigger is we need to burn this money within 3 months. The grant was for this period, but now we have to burn it within 3 months. That is the reality of the situation. So it takes away the issue of time. It actually takes away the issue that risk management is a process. It takes away the issue that partnership is actually be carefully and respectfully engaging with one another and appreciating one another. I'll just give a comment. I mean, South Africa, where we are discussing, how do we do collective programming from an agency perspective and do it in solidarity and not competitive like it is. So it's from the other side, but also from the local actor perspective. So is it that in addition to not being given the time, in addition to not having the capacity to manage the risk, so we then roll into implementation? And somehow local actors, I think because we know the context and we know our people and we know the linkages, somehow we work it out through the risks that we find on ground, even without investment in capacity. But what's next? Let's intentionally invest in the institutional capacity of local and national actors so that they can be better stewards towards risk management, because at the end of the day, it will influence the quality of the services that goes down to the rights holder on ground that is desperate for this support, for this water, for this food, amidst even the funding that has already been cut. Now, when we go to partnerships, a lot of partnerships that we have, I was just speaking to a local actor from Malawi who said, oh, the kind of things we go through. I'm in a struggle now with a partner who told me, we can only give you up to 20% operations to get, it will also cater for your staff. And then Joseph is saying that, but then there is high level of inflation. The contract is not factoring in inflation. So this is just a conversation I just had before I came to this meeting. But what does that mean in terms of partnership? There is totally no respect and consideration of the other partner who is coming into this partnership. And if the inflation is changing every day, then it is definitely going to affect the quality of the humanitarian response that they want to do, that this youth group wants to do. So what's left is that in these partnerships, it's important that it's considerate of both parties, moving away from contractual to actual partnerships. It's important that as we look into risks, we are not shifting risks to partners. Even us, the national actors, we are doing it to other smaller actors that we work with. So if we get good operational costs, we're only giving them the activity monies. This is something that came from one of our consultations as well. And then we are labeled the big boys and the big girls, even at the national perspective. So we're not even entering into a discourse of discovering what are the risks that you may foresee. How are we going to work towards mitigating them? What internal risk management action plan do we have? It's not there. But in what should be next is ample time as you enter into a partnership to allow your colleague who is going to run on ground to assess the risks, identify, assess the degree it could have in terms of influence, and come up with mitigation measures. That would be the norm.
That's amazing. I love the point that you raised around how do we actually manage risk if we're rushing everything to spend the money that may come late from donors. Ahmad, I saw you unmute, and I know you have a lot to share about this, especially with the work that you're doing around the risk perception. So maybe you can share a bit more on your experience and your recent conversations around this.
Yeah, sorry, there's a big chopper passing over. I didn't get your question, but could you please come back?
Yes, sorry. So Naomi has very rightly, and I can see a few people in the chat agreeing with everything that was mentioned around the sometimes being rushed, not factoring in risk where it really is affecting local actors, local communities, markets with fluctuating resources, prices, and whatnot, and how risk is managed at a certain level but pushed down on another level. And you had mentioned that there's a lot of work that you're currently doing in Kenya around risk perception and work with other stakeholders, but also funding and ensuring that there's sufficient resourcing allocated. So maybe you can share your thoughts around the conversation that has happened right now, but also the additional work that we said we'd circle back to.
So let me first take 2 steps back. The first thing is, as a network, we said at the very beginning when we are forming, how do we go around it? So we said the first thing is we will not handle resources on behalf of members. So that was the first thing. We did not take on board the risk. We said each of the different actors should keep their risk, do their relationships with their members. And how we did it is because some of the members in the consortium, I mean the network, were already having long-term partnerships. Then when we started, we said, can those local actors be onboarded from a perspective that they will learn how to do cash transfer and voucher programming, and they are trained in it through a process of learning on job in the field after an initial 3-day, 4-day sessions. After we went into the field and the processes were happening, then we invited INGOs while we are doing that process to also do the due diligence processes alongside, such that by the time now we were going forward with the response and reaching the point where we were going to do the release of resources, our main aim was to build the infrastructure around cash and voucher delivery, so that a number of the members in advance will be able to have how they're going to use the e-wallet model. They will have already signed up with a number of networks who are using the phone. The penetration here in Kenya is close to 90%. So it was easy to be able to really build in all those kinds of things for the local actor to be ready. And as we speak, from that beginning up to today, out of the 30, initially only 2 organizations were doing cash transfer programming. So now we're having 14 of them able to have cash transfer programming, deliver the last mile, and we agreed on harmonized models with the stakeholders, the like-minded organizations. So we're using an 8-step cash transfer programming approach, and we also developed an e-voucher model that is going to use the markets to be able to do. So as a network, we are enabling to put in the systems together with the local actors in readiness for action, and to enable the local actor be able to push huge sums of money within the last mile approach, such that by the time they go through the processes with their partners who are now have trusted them. So we started through a trust building through collaboration approaches over time. The second one I can give as an example is and build in the infrastructure for local actors to be able to ready to push the last mile. So by the time we do an analysis of the crisis that is happening in certain areas, we developed an internal trigger mechanism and then aggregate the information and then tell to the partners and the system that such and such a place from a local crisis to a national crisis perspective is in crisis. And we have already done this analysis. This is the situation. When we approach, then we say, this number of our members are out there in the field. Please partner with them. And because we already know quite a number of things have been done with them, then once they identify local partners and they say these different partners, we have seen this, we say none of our partners are having a capacity gap. We will deploy from another member from the different pool of 11. We have looked at 11 different sectoral skills, and we already developed that. So we have a SOP, which now enables for quick delivery of these kinds of stuff. And then as a network, then we're able to deploy the persons being delivered to really support, will be given a 10% capacity support on top of their normal salary to be able to move in to do that kind of a response. Secondly, I want to give, during the COVID period, we were using what we are calling community perception surveying models, perception tracking approaches to be able to support the healthcare system to enable the use of now cash and e-voucher again to deliver the caregivers aspect. We didn't wait. So as we developed that with the community health workers at the lower level, then we already built the rapport with the different actors to show that the less contact approach is already been demonstrated here. And from there, we will be able to really do that. I can give another example where during the locust problem that happened, we were able to identify the enumerators and the different people who have been working in the field who are able to have motorbikes. They had smartphones. We developed an app together with some of the like-minded INGOs. And from there, they were able to track 235 in 7 counties in readiness. And then they were able to take pictures of the cycle of the locust. And with that kind of a mechanism, by the time we did it for the first 3, the information that was coming was being fed into the government and FAO setups to be able to really do the spraying of the locusts and to be able to really do. So we were demonstrating again there through locally led and local compliances in action. But because we have already developed those kinds of systems, then they were able to now come on board. By the time the first 3 months ended, we scaled up that to supporting the crisis affected locations to 17,000 households in a very short time. And then finally, I just wanted to really look at how, as a result of now working on these kinds of systems, we do a snapshot assessment. And then I can remember in the 2021 crisis of the drought, we used that analysis together with the like-minded to be able to pitch it to a number of governors in Kenya. And through that, then the president was able to declare a crisis for the drought. With that kind of a setup, we were able to get our entry into the humanitarian country team light. And from there, we are not pushing for the network, but we are pushing for systems change. And we are in that space. I remember there was an allocation to come to Kenya because Kenya was not getting a lot of SAF funds. And 8 million was received for SAF. And what we used to pitch was a localization as the key reason why Kenya needed to be given money. And out of that money, 1.2 million was given through one UN agency for the purpose of now doing the localization push with cash transfer programming. And as we speak today, we are now looking at the crisis modifiers being held by different organizations through a crisis. And I talked about a networked response. So in that networked response, we deployed using a rapid response mechanism to be able to bring in skills from the different members in a certain region. And then they were hosted under one of the members. And then we were able to deploy resources through a crisis mechanism. And through their engagements, they were also having Start Network brought in resources. A number of other agencies came in. And when we mapped the number of local members who are within the AHN, who are within that space, we were able to see there were quite a lot. As we did that, then we found that we used what we call a review, real-time review model with communities, and they still said the response was late. So from that perspective, we did in that process, we brought in all the INGOs who are doing these different responses, and we tried to do one CITREP to be delivered to a number of actors to be able to really inform them about what's going on, why we need to go to the next notch, and to reduce the reporting burden of local actors, which we still need to crack. And in the real-time review process, it was clear if we had used the crisis modifier each of the different organizations were having, we could easily have pitched it and plugged into a government model that will really influence government to bring in their 2% disaster risk management resources and be able to really push that agenda and use the grand bargain processes of resources available, which can be used now to bring in more resources. But my key calling in this aspect is cash transfer and voucher programming have been a key rider to be able to transform and work the localization agenda for local actors. And I'm certain, and in this meeting, be able to really say that without that, we will not really have been able to really push and demonstrate walking the talk as local actors and develop our local humanitarian leadership in ways it's happening today. And I believe if cash and voucher processes are really going to be able to be used in the reset to a level where we are really talking about it, not only in country pool funds, but even locally led responses like us, networks, which we are looking at it from a perspective we are calling virtual pool funds in Kenya because there are no pool funds. So if we sign up standard operating procedures together with the government system and layer it on their 2%, then we're able to have each of the different members really having cash transfer programming, be able to anchor in, be able to give resources to their own local partners the way they were already doing it, but agree to be able to use the 8-step approach or the cash and voucher models, which we have already designed that have really proved the process. So for me, I just see trust and compliance, which we have already demonstrated in action, is sufficient enough to help every other stakeholder walk the mile with us without us waiting for you to really do the pieces. So that then we really have it right. So in this process, again, the compliance sign-off happens jointly. So as we do the processes and do community-based targeting and then go to the next stage of know your customer, the M&A teams do it, and the local partner is given the list to be able to do the payment through their own system. As we do this, I think we have already cracked it in a number of front lines. The only key piece is, can we have those partnerships and processes put in advance? Local actors can move the next mile and really push it. And from a perspective of the SLR, which Sagal really talked about, I was looking at it from a perspective that we really need to move the active citizenship approach, where already a lot of mutual aid is really happening within their setups, which is not really counted. So before a crisis happens, the amount of money moving around within the community cycles to really respond to a crisis is huge. Can we bring in all that which local actors can really map out, because those are resources which can be leveraged. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ahmad. Sagal, I saw you unmute, so come in.
Okay, quick comments. I do want to mention, I think we should be quite honest with ourselves that communities cannot do it all. I think that's really important to mention. And I think a common misunderstanding with mutual aid and SCLR or community-led response is that the community is going to do everything A through Z. And I don't think that's realistic. I think there are INGOs, external actors bring a specific skill set that is very much still needed today. And I hope that that work is complementary to the work that the community is already doing on the ground, or local actors are already doing on the ground, and even take it a step further to actually bring them along and have these conversations, allow them to decide what these bigger scaled projects or developmental projects could look like from an INGO perspective. But I did want to also comment on just it's a bit of an encouragement as well to some folks. I mean, funding delays do happen. So in Naomi's comments, I mean, I've experienced it myself. I think this is quite cheeky too, but I would say I would encourage local actors not to just accept it. I mean, of course, the funds are needed, but I would encourage you to be quite upfront with the donors or external actors. Be honest. This is why, you need more time. If already 2 months had already gone by without funds being distributed to the local organization, then tell them, can you add the 2 months from at the end of the deadline, or what's so on and so forth. With SCLR, one thing I usually ask for is to have a 2-year budget, a 2-year partnership, because I don't think 6 months or 1 year is enough. I want to see that change, that communal change, that community conversations. And sometimes because of the weather, migration patterns, all of these are really happening in these countries. Things happen. And so for us to have a time, staff, international staff, or even local staff, they go on, PTO, not everyone's at the office at all times. Things happen. There are other initiatives taking place. So to be able to have that breathing room, I would say negotiate that. When they come back to you, budget lines are not just, there for a reason. Explain to them why you need a larger budget for transport. It's because you're traveling 700 kilometers a day, one way, to a certain direction or certain site. So just be really honest, be upfront, as some encouragement happens there.
Yeah.
And can I just add in a bit on that? Largely, there is a major problem still in perceptions of risks from different actors. For example, if you are partnering with a local actor and there's no pre-financing, we thought the INGOs and the UN were able to really have resources at their disposal through so many years of having ICRs and these kind of things. Or really sign up grants with the donor that you are pre-financing this thing. These are the kind of things. So the project needs to start up as early as possible. So from that kind of a perspective, then it's very clear. One other major problem really affecting local actors is that when you're doing tranching or contractual tranches in the process, you're talking about in the end, up to 90% being released, and then 10% is withheld. This 10% withheld includes local salaries. It includes a number of, if the amount was huge, it means that you have put the local name of the local actor at stake. The image, they have gone into contractual agreements with service providers. It takes quite a lot of time before payments and closure of those projects happen. Startup was a problem. Now ending time also becomes a problem. So I was just thinking in the process of the INGOs and the UN really looking at their systems internally, it will be very critical that they review and look at the systems that they are using. Is their tranching going right? Why not use, because cash transfers are already known and vouchers are already known. The amounts of money that will be used in every cycle is already known. Why not transfer 20% together with the 1 or 2 tranches of cash or voucher in the first cycle? And then from there, a certain percentage of that money is used in the first cycle. You are ready to disburse the next resources to be able to ensure cash flow within the programming really goes on. And I think those are the things which we as local actors will like also the INGOs and the UN to discuss with the donors. And I'm sure it will be very critical that we use these kinds of processes to really deal with the risks and the processes of really smoothing out. And one last thing is the system resources are not sufficient. So if it is not sufficient, are we using that dollar to leverage 10 more dollars? If we are going to go in the direction where we're just using that space only to really look internally about the resources we have in the system, then we'll be lost. Thank you.
I can't believe the session is done. There's still so many questions, so many insights, but I think the biggest takeaway from today is, key terms that have been used: like-minded actors, patience, time, and conversations, sharing resources, building trust over time, collective and solidarity-based programming with intention that goes beyond the time frame of a project and resources that are being allocated. I just want to say a big thank you to each and every one of you today. A big thank you to our amazing speakers, Naomi, Ahmed, Segal. Your thoughts, your leadership, the work that you're doing in different spaces is inspirational. And I personally know I'm going to be following up on all of the amazing work that you're doing. With that, in less than a minute to spare, make sure that you drop your thoughts and insights onto the Padlet that I shared again in the chat. And we hope to see you all again on November 19th as we wrap up these conversations in the What's Next final webinar of the 4-part webinar series. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of day.